Imagine for a second that you are just standing up from a chair and you decide to walk across the room.
Right.
It's a completely subconscious act, right?
Uh,
Like you don't tell your knee to bend, you don't tell your ankle to flex. You just look at the door and, well, your biological autopilot takes you there.
Yeah, you don't even think about it.
Exactly. But I want you to imagine a scenario where that simple automatic act of taking a single step suddenly requires this immense, exhausting amount of mental and physical effort, where every single stride is like a calculated risk.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that hidden struggle is the daily reality for people dealing with a condition known as drop foot, which frequently happens after someone suffers a stroke.
It is a profound loss of a freedom we completely take for granted. The moment that automatic mobility breaks down, the physical and emotional toll is just massive.
Yeah.
We're talking about a condition that fundamentally shrinks a person's world.
And that brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We are looking at an incredible story of medical ingenuity targeting that exact problem. We have a stack of sources today, primarily this incredibly accessible, human-centered medical blog post about stroke recovery in the UK, alongside, well, the actual dense, rigorous scientific paper it's based on.
The 1997 paper.
Right. Published back in 1997 in the journal Clinical Rehabilitation by a team of researchers, Burge and colleagues, working at a proper research center at Salisbury District Hospital. Together, these sources reveal how scientists use basic electronics to essentially hack the human nervous system.
It's a wild story.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this, because reading through this material, there's such a stark contrast. You have this very encouraging, patient-focused tone in the blog post, which talks about reclaiming independence, and then you have this heavy, data-packed medical paper from 1997, detailing like electrical frequencies and muscle spasticity.
Bridging that gap between the simple hope in the blog and the rigorous clinical data in the paper reveals a fascinating story about restoring human mobility. And what is crucial to understand from both sources is that this restoration, it isn't coming from some magical overnight cure.
Right, no magic wand.
Exactly. It is the result of incredibly clever, highly targeted engineering applied directly to a mechanical failure in the human body.
Well, when reading the clinical paper, the first thing that jumps out is that the mechanics of drop foot are far more complicated than the name suggests. It isn't just a matter of having, like, a weak foot.
Not at all.
In chronic hemiplegic stroke patients, meaning patients who have paralysis on one side of their body following a stroke, it's actually a dual failure of the muscular system. First, there's a total failure of active control in the anterior tibial muscles, which are, the muscles on the front of your lower leg.
Right.
The upper motor neurons in the brain are damaged by the stroke, so the signal to lift the foot simply never reaches the leg.
And the secondary failure makes it significantly worse. Because while the lifting muscles are essentially offline, there is an increased, inappropriate, spastic muscle tone in the extensor muscles of the leg, particularly the calf.
So they're fighting each other.
Exactly. The muscles pulling the foot down are overly tense and constantly resisting.
So it's not just a dead weight, it's an act of resistance.
Mm.
Let me try an analogy here to visualize the mechanics.
Yeah.
Imagine you're trying to walk on dry land wearing a heavy scuba flipper, but your brain can't tell your ankle to lift the flipper up.
Okay, I can picture that.
Worse, there's a tight bungee cord constantly pulling the toe of that flipper toward the floor. During the swing phase of walking, like when you try to swing your leg forward to take the next step, that toe is just going to drag and catch on the carpet.
In a clinical setting that's known as toe catch, the foot literally catches on the ground, preventing the leg from clearing the floor. And the blog post we reviewed does an excellent job of describing how terrifying this is for the patient.
Yeah, I bet.
A simple trip to the grocery store becomes a minefield. To compensate for that toe catch, the patient is forced into highly abnormal asymmetrical gaits. The medical literature refers to these compensatory movements as hip hitching and circumduction.
Which means physically heaving your entire hip upward and swinging your stiff leg in a wide outward arc just to get the foot forward without tripping.
It looks exactly how it sounds. Exhausting.
Right. If every step feels like a marathon and a tightrope walk combined, you're eventually just going to stay in the chair. The psychological barrier becomes just as restrictive as the physical one.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we begin to see why tackling this specific mechanical failure is so important. The internal connection, so the electrical signal from the brain to the muscle is broken.
Right.
But the lower motor neurons in the leg are actually intact and fully capable of contracting the muscle. They just aren't receiving the emails from the brain anymore.
They're unplugged.
Exactly. So the Salisbury researchers looked at this isolated disconnect and decided to bypass the broken brain signal entirely by introducing an external electrical signal directly to the leg.
They turned to a technology called functional electrical stimulation, or FES.
Yeah.
Specifically, they utilized a device they had originally designed back in 1988 at the hospital called the Odd-Stock Dropped Foot Stimulator, or the ODFS.
Yeah.
And the engineering here is incredibly specific. The paper details that the ODFS emits a train of asymmetrical biphasic electrical pulses. Let's break that down because biphasic means the electrical current rapidly alternates direction, right? I assume they use an alternating current so you don't build up a static electrical charge in the tissue and accidentally burn the patient's skin.
That is the exact reason. Delivering a continuous single-direction current would eventually cause skin irritation or even electrolysis at the electrode site. Yeah, not good. By making the pulses biphasic, the net electrical charge left in the tissue is zero, which keeps the skin safe for daily continuous use. And the duration of these pulses is incredibly brief, just zero point 0.3 milliseconds, delivered at a frequency of 40 hertz.
40 pulses a second.
Right.
That specific frequency is necessary to cause a smooth, continuous muscle contraction, rather than just a series of, involuntary twitches. You want the muscle to hold the foot up smoothly, not jerk it around.
Right. It needs to look and feel like a normal step.
And the delivery method is relatively straightforward. They place skin surface electrodes directly over the common peroneal nerve. That's the nerve bundle running down the outside of the leg that feeds into those offline lifting muscles.
But timing is the true hurdle here. Walking is a highly dynamic activity. The stimulation has to happen at the exact millisecond the foot needs to lift.
Right.
Continuously shocking the nerve would keep the foot flexed permanently, making it impossible to put weight on the leg and actually take a step. The system has to know where the patient is in their bait cycle.
To solve the timing issue, the ODFS uses a simple force-sensitive switch placed right inside the heel of the patient's shoe.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah. Depending on the patient's specific walking pattern, the switch triggers the electrical stimulation either the moment the heel lifts off the ground or the moment the heel strikes the ground. The second that switch is activated, the device sends the 40 hertz signal, the peroneal nerve fires, the muscle contracts, and the foot lifts perfectly in time with the natural swing phase of the step.
What's fascinating here is the cascading effect of that single-timed electrical pulse. The stimulation doesn't just passively yank the foot upward, it taps into the body's natural wiring to facilitate what is known as a flexor withdrawal response.
That's a reflex arc, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like when you accidentally step on a piece of glass, your body doesn't wait for your brain to process the pain.
Right, there's no time for that.
Yeah, the nerves in your leg automatically trigger your hip, knee, and ankle to yank your frame away from the floor.
Precisely. The electrical pulse from the ODFS essentially hijacks that built-in spinal reflex. By triggering the common peroneal nerve, it not only brings the ankle into greater dorsiflexion to clear the toes, but it can also cause a slight helpful flexion at the hip and knee.
Oh, wow.
It creates a much more natural, fluid, and active movement than the conventional alternative.
The conventional alternative being like a rigid plastic boot.
Exactly.
The traditional treatment for drop foot is an ankle foot orthosis, or an AFO. It is a stiff splint that just holds the ankle at a 90-degree angle. A plastic splint is a completely passive tool. It prevents the toe from dropping, sure, but you are still just dragging a locked, immobilized joint around.
It's cumbersome.
Yeah. The ODFS is an active intervention utilizing the patient's own musculature. And looking at the specs of this active medical device, it is powered by a standard PP3 9-volt battery.
Which is wild.
The same little rectangular battery you'd find in a smoke detector is providing enough current to reliably remote control a human limb.
It highlights a beautiful principle of medical engineering. Breakthroughs don't always require millions of dollars of futuristic proprietary tech. A brilliantly applied, relatively simple circuit leveraging an off-the-shelf battery can fundamentally alter someone's quality of life.
But a cool gadget and a great concept on paper aren't enough. The blog post we read leans heavily on the UK's long-respected history of trusted, evidence-based medical research. The Salisbury team couldn't just build a 9-volt nerve stimulator, hand it out, and claim the problem was solved.
No, of course not.
They needed to prove this wasn't guesswork. and they needed to prove it wasn't just a placebo effect, making patients feel better without actually improving their mechanics.
Which brings us to the core of the 1997 paper, the randomized controlled trial. They designed a rigorous study recruiting patients who had suffered a single stroke at least 6 months prior.
Why 6 months?
That 6-month window is critical. By waiting half a year, the researchers ensured the patient's conditions were chronic and stable. Any natural spontaneous recovery from the stroke had likely plateaued. If the patients improved during the trial, it would be due to the intervention, not just the body naturally healing over time.
Okay, that makes sense. So, to prove this objectively, they took 32 stable patients and split them right down the middle. 16 patients went into the treatment group, receiving the ODFS device, training on how to use it, plus 10 sessions of targeted physiotherapy.
Right.
The other 16 became the control group, receiving the exact same 10 sessions of physiotherapy, but without the electrical stimulation device.
The physiotherapy element is a vital inclusion. It wasn't just about handing over a gadget, it was a comprehensive effort to re-educate the gait. But as you mentioned earlier, the true burden of drop foot isn't just that it slows you down, it's the sheer exhaustion.
Yeah.
The effort required is what destroys a patient's lifestyle. Measuring walking speed with a stopwatch on a 10-meter linoleum walkway is easy, but measuring the subjective feeling of effort is a complex scientific challenge.
You can't just ask someone, are you tired after they walk and put that on a clinical graph. You need an objective metric for a subjective experience.
Exactly.
The researchers utilized something called the Physiological Cost Index, or PCI. It is a brilliant measure of human walking efficiency. To calculate a patient's PCI, you take their walking heart rate, subtract their resting heart rate, and then divide that number by their walking speed.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the PCI formula effectively treats the human body like an engine.
Sure.
We are measuring fuel efficiency.
It is exactly like measuring a car's miles per gallon. If a patient's resting heart rate is 70 beats per minute and struggling down the hospital hallway spikes it to 120, their heart is working overtime, generating 50 extra beats per minute.
Right.
If they are moving at a crawl while doing that, their PCI is incredibly high. They are spending a massive amount of heartbeats for every single meter of ground covered. Their fuel efficiency is just terrible.
So the trial had two clear baseline metrics: raw walking speed and the physiological cost index. Over the course of the study, the researchers wanted to see if the FES device could improve the human body's fuel efficiency compared to standard physiotherapy alone.
And the hard data from the trial strongly validated the Salisbury teens technology. For the group using the electrical stimulator, their walking speed increased by 20.5% when wearing the device at the end of the trial.
Which is huge.
A 20% boost in speed is massive for someone who previously struggled to cross a room. But the effort metric, the PCI, is what truly stands out. Their effort level dropped by a massive 24.9%.
The physical cost of taking a step was slashed by a quarter. Walking literally became lighter and easier. The heart didn't have to work nearly as hard to propel the body forward because the leg was moving cleanly through the swing phase without the dragging and the hip hitching.
By contrast, standard physiotherapy alone barely moved the needle. The control group saw a meager 5.2% increase in walking speed, and their effort, their PCI, saw only a 1% reduction.
Wow.
Yeah, you simply cannot stretch or exercise a paralyzed, disconnected nerve back into functioning. The physical limitation remains, which is why standard therapy alone failed to drastically improve their efficiency.
Right.
The blog post wasn't exaggerating the hope. The difference the device made was profound and measurable. But reading through the final conclusions of the clinical paper, there is a catch.
This raises an important question, one the researchers confronted with total transparency. Does the odd-stock dropped foot stimulator permanently rewire the damaged brain muscle connection?
Yeah.
Like if you use the device for several months retraining your leg, can you eventually take it off and maintain that 20% speed increase?
The trial data showed a definitive no. The researchers measured for a carryover effect. They tested the treatment group at the end of the trial while the device was turned off. And without the active electrical stimulation firing into the nerve, there was no statistically significant improvement in walking speed or PCI.
So it stops working when it's off.
The moment the 9-volt battery is removed, the primary benefits vanish. The patient's leg returns to its baseline struggle.
Having that sudden freedom, feeling your walking become 25% easier, only to instantly lose it when you take your shoe off at the end of the day, it sounds devastating.
Doesn't it? It feels heartbreaking.
But both the clinical researchers and the authors of the patient blog reframe this reality. The medical device is an aid, not a biological cure.
It functions exactly like a pair of reading glasses.
Mm,
If you have poor vision, putting on glasses instantly solves the problem.
right.
But the glasses don't heal your eyes.
Right.
The second you take them off, the text on the page is blurry again. We don't consider reading glasses a medical failure simply because they aren't a permanent cure. They're a tool that allows you to interface with the world.
That's a great way to put it.
The ODFS doesn't cure upper motor neuron stroke damage, but the paper notes in incredible detail. Every single patient in the trial who used the stimulator chose to keep using it after the study ended. Turning a daily, exhausting battle into a realistic possibility is a massive victory.
That patient adoption rate speaks volumes. But the researchers were also rigorously honest about the flaws in their own study and the practical, everyday friction of the device. Transparency is the hallmark of good science.
For sure.
For instance, they openly admitted a major limitation in their trial design, the lack of a placebo group.
Right, because in a standard drug trial, you give one group the real pill and one group a sugar pill, so neither knows who is receiving the actual treatment. But you can't run a blind placebo trial with electrical nerve stimulation. You can't fake an electrical pulse that forces a foot to lift. The patient would instantly know if they were wearing a dummy device because their foot would drag.
Because a blind trial was impossible, the researchers acknowledged the presence of expectation bias. The group that received the innovative technological gadget, along with the extra attention required to learn how to program and place it, might have been far more highly motivated than the control group that only received standard stretching and therapy.
Oh.
Motivation plays a massive role in stroke recovery.
Beyond the trial design, the paper highlights the friction of taking this device home into the real world. It isn't a magical slip-on shoe. Setting up the ODFS requires severe precision.
It really does.
Patients have to find the exact right spot to place the skin surface electrodes every single day. The paper specifies locating the motor point of the tibialis anterior muscle, or a very specific point on the common peroneal nerve near the head of the fibula.
Finding the head of the fibula and locating a nerve bundle is a tall order for anyone, let alone someone recovering from a stroke.
Yeah.
The motor point is the exact location where the nerve enters the muscle belly, providing the strongest contraction for the least amount of electrical current.
And the placement has to be millimeter perfect because the peroneal nerve branches out. If the patient places the electrode slightly off-center and hits the superficial branch of the nerve instead of the deep branch, the foot won't lift straight up.
Right.
Instead, the electrical pulse will cause the ankle to violently twist outward, a movement called eversion. That kind of twisting could easily roll the ankle and cause a severe fall. You have to hit the exact spot to achieve balanced, safe dorsiflexion.
And the placement changes slightly from person to person and can even vary day to day based on skin resistance, muscle fatigue, or subtle changes in leg swelling.
Oh, wow, I didn't even think about swelling.
Yeah. The paper explicitly notes that some stroke patients simply lacked the cognitive ability to consistently troubleshoot the setup, or they lacked the physical dexterity in their hands to peel and place the sticky electrodes accurately.
The friction of daily reality dictates the success of the technology. You have to apply conductive gel, route the wires up the legs so they don't catch on your trousers, and secure the battery pack.
It's a whole process.
If a patient didn't have a dedicated carer at home to help them through that routine every morning, the device was essentially useless to them, no matter how good the internal electronics were. Real-world medical tech can't just work in a pristine hospital lab. It has to survive the messy, lived reality of the patient's morning routine.
It is a brilliantly designed intervention, but it is not a universal one. It requires a patient who is motivated, capable of operating the device, and whose specific nerve damage leaves the lower motor neurons responsive to stimulation.
Right.
But for those who fit that criteria, the impact on their fuel efficiency and their independence is undeniable.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive asking you to imagine the sheer exhaustion of losing the automatic ability to take a step. And we explored how a targeted external device could act as a substitute for a damaged signal from the brain.
Yeah.
Even if you never experienced drop foot, this deep dive is a perfect example of why rigorous, measured science matters. It doesn't promise a miraculous overnight cure, but it delivers functional, tested hope.
Blending these two sources, the humanity of the blog post and the dense data of the clinical trial, reveals that the right help, applied at the exact right millisecond of a footstep, turns a hazard into a stride.
It is Quite literally the difference between being trapped in a chair and being able to walk across the room.
There is one final thread for you to pull on as we wrap up today. The Oddsock dropped foot stimulator works entirely by bypassing a broken connection. It doesn't try to fix the damaged bridge in the brain. It just builds a new external route to keep the traffic moving. I want you to think about other broken connections, whether that is in complex biological systems, in structural engineering, or even in our broader societal systems. If we can't always cure the root cause of a problem, what simple, cleverly timed external switches could we design to bypass the damage and just keep things moving forward?
Next time you take a step, maybe take a second to appreciate the complex, invisible signals making it happen. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.